United States, 2001. Part 1. The Morning of Faith. The city of New York was already awake and bustling long before the sun peeked over the horizon. The streets teemed with life as commuters filled the sidewalks, taxis honked their way through the traffic, and the distant rumble of the subway added a low hum to the city's ever-present noise. It was a Tuesday morning like any other, the air crisp with the first hints of autumn, as Michael Bennett made his way to the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Michael was a man of routine. At 42 years old, he was a senior executive at a prominent financial firm, known not just for his sharp business acumen, but for his unwavering faith. Each morning, before the world could pull him into the whirlwind of meetings and deadlines, Michael sought solace in his relationship with God. His colleagues often remarked on his calm demeanor, his ability to handle even the most stressful situations with a sense of peace that was as unshakable as it was inspiring. But this morning was different. As Michael stepped out of the elevator on the 32nd floor, he couldn't shake a feeling that had settled deep in his chest, a sense of urgency, of something unspoken yet pressing. The feeling was so strong that instead of heading straight to his desk, he walked to the large window that overlooked the city. The view was breathtaking, the skyscrapers standing tall under a sky that was a perfect shade of blue, without a cloud in sight. Yet, the beauty of the morning did nothing to ease the unease that churned within him. Michael turned away from the window and walked to his office. He placed his briefcase on the desk and opened it, pulling out the Bible that he kept with him at all times. The leather cover was worn from years of use, the pages marked with notes and underlined passages that had guided him through life's many trials. Today, he felt a deep need to turn to Psalm 91, a passage that had always brought him comfort and a sense of protection. As he read the words, "He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty," Michael felt a wave of calm wash over him. He sank into his chair and began to pray, his hands resting on the open Bible, his head bowed. He prayed for his family, for his colleagues, for the city he loved. But more than anything, he prayed for protection, for a shield of divine safety to be placed over everyone in the building. The minutes ticked by, the sounds of the office humming quietly in the background. The click of keyboards, the murmur of voices, the occasional ring of a phone. These were the sounds of a typical morning in the North Tower. Yet, as Michael prayed, those sounds faded into the background, replaced by a deep, focused silence that allowed him to connect more fully with God. He felt as though he was being enveloped in a cocoon of peace, even as the unease in his chest continued to gnaw at him. Just as he was finishing his prayer, a loud, bone-shaking explosion reverberated through the building. The windows rattled violently, and the floor seemed to buckle beneath him. Michael's eyes snapped open, his heart pounding in his chest. For a split second, he couldn't comprehend what had happened. It was as if the world had suddenly been torn apart by an invisible force. He stood up, the Bible still in his hands, and rushed to the window. What he saw sent a shock of terror through him. Thick, black smoke billowed from the South Tower, and through the haze, he could see the jagged edges of a massive hole torn into the building. Flames licked at the air, and debris rained down on the streets below. It was a sight that seemed ripped from the worst of nightmares, yet it was happening right before his eyes. Michael's mind raced. This wasn't an accident. Something had gone terribly, horribly wrong. He knew he had to act, but the first thing he did was close his eyes once more and whisper a prayer for strength. "Lord, guide me. Show me what to do. Protect those who are in danger. Give me the strength to help." The prayer was brief, but it was enough to steady his trembling hands. Michael knew that panic would do no good. He had to remain calm, had to keep his wits about him. The sense of urgency that had plagued him all morning now crystallized into a clear, driving purpose. He needed to help others get out, and he needed to do it quickly. As he stepped out of his office, the hallway was already filling with people. The looks on their faces ranged from confusion to outright terror. Some were frozen in place, unable to process what was happening. while others were frantically trying to make sense of the situation, asking each other questions that had no answers. "Everyone, stay calm." Michael's voice rang out, commanding and firm. He raised his hands to get their attention. "We need to evacuate the building. Take the stairs and help those who need it. Don't push, don't shove, just keep moving. God is with us, and we will get out of here together." The authority in his voice snapped some people out of their daze. They began to move, albeit slowly, towards the emergency stairwell. Michael took the lead, guiding them as they formed a line. The tremors that shook the building continued intermittently, each one more violent than the last. But Michael didn't waver. He knew that fear could easily paralyze them, and he couldn't let that happen. As they made their way down the stairwell, the full scope of the disaster began to sink in. The stairs were crowded with people from all floors, all of them moving as fast as they could without causing a stampede. The air was thick with dust and smoke, and the temperature was rising. Michael could hear the faint sound of emergency sirens from outside, but they seemed distant, almost unreachable. Yet, despite the chaos, Michael's mind was clear. He kept repeating Psalm 91 in his head, using it as a mantra to keep his fear at bay. "He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge." The words gave him strength, reminding him that even in the face of such overwhelming terror, God's protection was ever present. Each step down felt like a small victory, but Michael knew they still had a long way to go. As they descended, he continued to encourage those around him, offering a steady hand to those who stumbled, whispering prayers to those who looked like they were about to give up. His calmness was contagious, and more than once, he saw fear give way to determination in the eyes of those he helped. By the time they reached the 20th floor, the situation had grown even more dire. The smoke was thicker now, making it difficult to breathe, and the heat was becoming unbearable. But Michael refused to give in to despair. He knew that they were getting closer to safety with every step, and he was determined to see them all out of the building alive. With each floor they descended, Michael felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him, but he also felt something else, a presence, a sense of divine guidance that told him he was not alone. It was this presence that kept him moving, kept him focused, even as the building groaned and shuddered around them. Finally, as they neared the lobby, Michael knew that the real test was about to begin. They were almost out, but the hardest part was yet to come. He could only hope that his faith, and the faith of those around him, would be enough to carry them through the final leg of their harrowing journey. Part 2. The Descent into Chaos. The moment Michael stepped out of his office and into the hallway, he was met with a scene of escalating panic. The once orderly environment had devolved into chaos as people scrambled to make sense of the explosion that had rocked the building. The air was thick with a sense of dread, an invisible weight pressing down on everyone as they tried to process what was happening. The lights flickered ominously, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls, further heightening the sense of fear. Michael's heart pounded in his chest, but his mind remained clear. He knew that panic would only lead to more chaos, and he couldn't allow that to happen. His eyes scanned the hallway, taking in the frightened faces of his colleagues, people he had worked with for years, who now looked to him for guidance. Without hesitation, he moved forward, his voice cutting through the noise with a calm authority that belied the turmoil within. "Everyone, stay calm," he repeated, louder this time, as he motioned for them to gather near the stairwell. "We need to evacuate the building. Use the stairs and help those who need it. Keep moving and don't stop. We'll get through this together." His words seemed to anchor those around him, providing a focal point amidst the swirling fear. Slowly, people began to move towards the stairwell, their movements hesitant at first, but gaining purpose as Michael led the way. The stairwell door creaked open, revealing the dimly lit steps that spiraled downward, a descent into the unknown. As they entered the stairwell, the atmosphere shifted. The narrow space amplified the sounds of shuffling feet, hurried breaths, and the occasional sobs of those who couldn't contain their fear. The walls, once a neutral gray, now felt claustrophobic, closing in on them as they descended. The heat was stifling, and with each step down, the temperature seemed to rise, adding to the growing sense of urgency. Michael took the lead, his senses heightened, every nerve on edge as he kept his focus on the task at hand. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, but he also felt a steady, unwavering faith that kept him grounded. With each step, he silently prayed for strength, for guidance, and for the safety of those around him. The stairwell was crowded, filled with people from all floors of the building, all of them moving with a single purpose: to get out. The sheer number of bodies packed into the confined space made the air thick and hard to breathe. Michael could hear the nervous chatter of those around him, snippets of conversation that spoke of fear and disbelief. "Did you see the plane? I can't believe this is happening. We have to get out. We have to get out." The voices blended together, creating a low hum of anxiety that buzzed in Michael's ears. But he didn't allow himself to be distracted. His focus remained on the path ahead, on the steps that stretched out before him, leading them down to safety. Every few steps, he glanced back to make sure no one was falling behind, offering a hand to those who stumbled or a word of encouragement to those who faltered. The descent was slow, agonizingly so, as the sheer volume of people trying to escape created a bottleneck. The building continued to tremble with aftershocks, each one sending fresh waves of fear through the crowd. The metal handrails felt warm to the touch, vibrating slightly as the structure groaned under the strain. Dust began to fill the air, making it even harder to breathe, and Michael could taste the grit on his tongue as he pressed forward. On the 28th floor, the group encountered their first major obstacle. The stairwell was partially blocked by debris, a chunk of ceiling that had collapsed, scattering chunks of concrete and twisted metal across the steps. The blockage was not complete, but it slowed their progress even further as people had to squeeze through the narrow gap that remained. Michael knew they couldn't afford to lose time. The building was unstable, and every minute they spent inside increased the risk of collapse. "Keep moving," he urged, his voice firm but calm. "We're almost through. Just keep moving." He led the way, carefully navigating the debris, helping others over the jagged pieces of concrete that littered the stairs. Every time someone hesitated, Michael was there, offering a steady hand, a reassuring word. His presence was a beacon of hope, and it was enough to keep them going. As they continued their descent, the stairwell became even more congested. People from the floors above had joined the mass exodus, adding to the crush of bodies pressing downward. The heat was now almost unbearable, the air thick with the smell of smoke and sweat. Every breath was a struggle, the oxygen seeming to thin with every step they took. But Michael refused to give in to despair. He kept his thoughts focused on God, on the Psalms he had read that morning, on the belief that they would make it out alive. It was this faith that kept him going, that allowed him to push through the exhaustion and the fear. Around the 25th floor, the group encountered another challenge. This time, it was a woman who had collapsed on the stairs, her body shaking with sobs. She was unable to move, frozen in place by terror. Michael recognized her as Sarah, a young woman who had only recently started working in the building. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear as she clutched the railing, unable to take another step. Michael knelt beside her, blocking the path of those behind him, who were now forced to stop as well. He placed a hand on her shoulder, speaking to her in a low, soothing voice. "Sarah, it's okay. We're going to get out of here. But I need you to be strong. I need you to stand up and keep moving." She shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "I can't. I'm too scared." Michael could see the fear in her eyes, the overwhelming sense of hopelessness that had taken hold of her. He knew that if she didn't move, they would all be trapped. He took a deep breath, closing his eyes as he offered a silent prayer for guidance. "Lord, give her the strength," he whispered, his voice filled with conviction. "Give her the courage to stand and walk out of this place. We know you are with us. We trust in you." As he prayed, he felt a warmth spread through him, a sense of peace that seemed to fill the space around them. When he opened his eyes, he saw that Sarah's breathing had slowed, her sobs subsiding as she looked up at him. There was still fear in her eyes, but it was no longer paralyzing. With Michael's help, she managed to stand, her legs shaky but able to support her weight. The people around them waited patiently, understanding that they were all in this together. No one pushed or complained. They simply waited, united by the shared desire to survive. Michael took Sarah's hand and began to lead her down the stairs. The group resumed its slow, steady descent, the steps seemingly endless as they made their way through the dimly lit stairwell. The air grew thicker with each passing floor, the sounds of the building's creaks and groans growing louder, more ominous. As they reached the 20th floor, the group encountered yet another challenge, a section of the stairwell that had been completely engulfed in smoke. The thick, acrid cloud made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead, and the heat was nearly unbearable. Michael knew that turning back was not an option. They had to push through, no matter how dangerous it seemed. He paused, taking a moment to steady himself before speaking to the group. "We need to move quickly through this section," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Cover your mouths and noses with whatever you have, clothing, handkerchiefs, anything. Stay close to the wall and keep moving. We'll make it through." He could see the fear in their eyes, but he also saw determination. They trusted him, and that trust was enough to keep them going. Michael led the way, one hand on the wall as he pressed forward through the smoke. The heat was suffocating, the smoke burning his lungs as he struggled to breathe. But he refused to stop, refused to let the fear take hold. Step by step, they pushed through the smoke-filled stairwell, their progress slow but steady. Michael could feel the strain in his muscles, the exhaustion beginning to take its toll. But he couldn't allow himself to falter. Not now, not when they were so close. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they emerged from the smoke. The air was still thick and heavy, but it was breathable. They had made it through another obstacle, and the sense of relief was palpable. But Michael knew they couldn't afford to rest. They had to keep moving. As they continued their descent, the group began to move with a renewed sense of purpose. The danger was still very real, but they had made it this far. There was no turning back now. Michael's faith remained unshaken, his resolve strengthened by the belief that God was guiding them, protecting them as they made their way down the tower. And so they pressed on, each step bringing them closer to the lobby, to safety, to the light at the end of the tunnel. But the hardest part was yet to come, and Michael knew that their faith and determination would be tested once more before they could finally escape the nightmare that had engulfed their world. Part 3. A Prayer for Strength. As the group reached the 20th floor, the stairwell was engulfed in darkness, illuminated only by the occasional flicker of emergency lights that cast long, eerie shadows along the walls. The atmosphere was heavy with the scent of smoke and sweat, and the air was thick, almost suffocating. Every breath felt like a laborious effort, and the sounds of hurried footsteps, muffled coughs, and whispered prayers filled the narrow space. The building groaned ominously with each tremor, a stark reminder that their time was running out. Michael led the way, his steps steady despite the exhaustion gnawing at his muscles. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him like a physical burden, but he refused to let it slow him. His thoughts were a continuous stream of silent prayers, each one a plea for strength, for guidance, for the lives of those following him. The further they descended, the more the enormity of the situation sank in. This was not just about survival. It was about faith, about the belief that they were not alone in this darkest of hours. The group moved as one, a fragile line of humanity, clinging to the hope that the lobby was just a few floors away. But the reality of their situation was stark. Each step was a battle, each floor a hard-won victory. The smoke grew thicker with every descent, and the oppressive heat made it feel as if the walls themselves were closing in. On the 18th floor, the group came to an abrupt halt. The stairwell ahead was filled with debris, fallen ceiling tiles, chunks of concrete, and twisted metal pipes that had collapsed under the strain of the building structure. The blockage was severe enough to make passage difficult, and for a moment, it seemed as if they were trapped. Panic began to ripple through the group, a palpable wave of fear that threatened to undo the progress they had made. Michael could feel it, the sudden rise in anxiety, the whispers of doubt that spread like wildfire. He knew that if he didn't act quickly, the fragile thread of hope they had been holding onto would snap. "Everyone, listen to me," Michael said, his voice cutting through the rising murmur. He moved to the front of the group, assessing the blockage with a critical eye. "We can get through this, but we need to stay calm. I want you to take a deep breath, trust in God, and help each other. We've made it this far. We're not giving up now." He began clearing the debris with his hands, pulling away pieces of rubble with a strength that belied his exhaustion. Others quickly joined in, their movements fueled by a renewed sense of purpose. The sound of concrete scraping against metal filled the stairwell, and bit by bit, they created a narrow passageway, just wide enough for them to squeeze through. Michael went first, testing the stability of the path they had cleared. It was precarious, but it held. He motioned for the others to follow, guiding them through the gap one by one. The process was slow, agonizingly so, but they made it through without incident. Once everyone was on the other side, they paused for a brief moment, the relief of overcoming yet another obstacle washing over them. But there was no time to rest. The building shuddered violently, a deep, bone-rattling tremor that sent fresh waves of dust cascading down from the ceiling. Michael's instinct screamed at him to move, to keep pushing forward, but his attention was drawn to Sarah, who was lagging behind, her steps faltering as the stress and exhaustion took their toll. "Sarah, stay with me," Michael called out, moving back to her side. He could see the fear in her eyes, the way her hands trembled as she clung to the railing. She was close to breaking, close to giving in to the overwhelming despair that had been gnawing at them all. "I can't," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the noise. "I can't keep going." Michael's heart ached for her, for all of them. They were so close, yet the end seemed just out of reach. He reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "You can do this, Sarah," he said, his voice filled with quiet conviction. "You're stronger than you know, and you're not alone. God is with you. He's been with us every step of the way." She looked at him, her eyes filling with tears, but there was a flicker of something else, hope. It was fragile, but it was there, a tiny spark that refused to be extinguished. "Let's pray together," Michael said, his tone gentle yet firm. Just a few words. "Lord, give us strength. Give us courage. Guide our steps as we walk through this valley of shadow. We trust in you, and we know that you are with us." As they prayed, Michael felt a warmth spread through him, a sense of peace that was almost tangible. The chaos around them seemed to fade, if only for a moment, replaced by a calm that was as deep as it was profound. When they finished, Sarah nodded, her grip on his hand tightening as if drawing strength from it. "Okay," she whispered, her voice steadier now. "Okay, I'm ready." They continued their descent, the group moving as one once more. The stairwell was a labyrinth of twists and turns, each step a reminder of the danger that loomed above them. The sounds of destruction were closer now, the groaning of metal, the distant roar of flames, the deafening crash of falling debris. It was as if the tower itself was alive, writhing in its death throes as it fought against the inevitable. Michael's mind raced with every step, calculating, praying, hoping. He knew they were running out of time, but he also knew that giving in to fear would only hasten their demise. He kept his focus on the goal, reaching the lobby, getting everyone out safely, trusting that they were being guided by a force greater than themselves. As they passed the 15th floor, a new challenge presented itself. The smoke, which had been a constant but manageable presence, thickened to the point where it became almost impossible to see. The once faint smell of burning was now overwhelming, stinging their eyes and filling their lungs with acrid fumes. The air was hot, almost searing, and every breath felt like inhaling fire. Michael knew they had to act fast. "Cover your mouths and noses," he instructed, pulling his shirt over his face. "Stay close to the wall and keep moving. We're almost there." The group obeyed, their movements more labored now, but still determined. They clung to the wall as if it were a lifeline, their hands brushing against the rough surface as they navigated the blinding smoke. Michael led the way, his heart pounding with the effort it took to keep going, but he refused to stop. He couldn't stop, not when they were so close. The stairwell felt endless, each step blending into the next in a blur of pain and exhaustion. Michael's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, memories of his family, prayers for those who were still trapped, the unshakable belief that they would make it out alive. He focused on that belief, on the faith that had guided him throughout his life, and used it to fuel his determination. At the 10th floor, they hit another snag. This time, it was a collapsed section of the stairwell that blocked their path completely. The way forward was impassable, and for a moment, despair threatened to overwhelm them. But Michael refused to give in. He assessed the situation quickly, his mind racing as he searched for a solution. The walls were still intact, and there was a narrow ledge along the side of the stairwell that could be used to bypass the blockage. It was risky, but it was their only option. "We can do this," Michael said, his voice strong despite the exhaustion. "We just need to move carefully, hold onto the wall, and take it one step at a time." He demonstrated first, inching his way along the narrow ledge with deliberate, steady movements. The drop below was terrifying, but he kept his focus on the goal, getting everyone out safely. Once he made it to the other side, he turned back and guided the others, one by one, until the entire group had crossed. It was a small victory, but it gave them the strength to keep going. The lobby was just a few floors away now, and the thought of reaching it spurred them on, despite the growing fatigue and fear. As they descended the final few floors, the noise from above grew louder, more ominous. The building was dying, its structure failing under the weight of the destruction. But Michael's resolve only strengthened. He knew that their survival depended on their ability to keep moving, to keep believing, to keep trusting that they were being guided by a force greater than themselves. And so they pressed on, each step bringing them closer to the lobby, to safety, to the light at the end of the tunnel. But the hardest part was yet to come, and Michael knew that their faith and determination would be tested once more before they could finally escape the nightmare that had engulfed their world. Part 4. The Final Push. The final stretch of the descent was a blur of motion and noise, every step a frantic race against time as Michael and the group neared the lobby. The stairwell was now a cacophony of sounds, distant explosions, the groaning of the building's frame as it struggled under the immense strain, and the heavy, labored breathing of those who had made it this far. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and dust, but through the haze, they could see the faint light filtering down from above, signaling that they were close to the ground level. Michael's heart pounded in his chest, not just from the physical exertion, but from the knowledge that they were almost there. The lobby represented safety, an escape from the nightmare that had engulfed them. But even as they pushed forward, he couldn't shake the feeling that danger was still close behind, that their race against time was far from over. As they burst through the stairwell door and into the lobby, the scene that greeted them was one of complete devastation. The once grand and orderly space had been transformed into a war zone. Shattered glass littered the floor, overturned furniture lay scattered about, and the air was filled with the acrid stench of smoke and burning debris. Emergency personnel were everywhere, guiding survivors to safety, tending to the injured, and shouting orders over the din. For a brief moment, the group hesitated, their eyes wide with shock at the destruction that surrounded them. But Michael knew there was no time to waste. The building trembled ominously, a low rumble that seemed to reverberate through the very floor beneath their feet. They had made it this far, but the danger was far from over. "Keep moving," Michael shouted, his voice hoarse but filled with determination. He motioned for the group to follow him, leading them through the chaos towards the exit. Every step felt like an eternity, the distance between them and the outside world stretching on impossibly long. But they pressed on, their movements fueled by the knowledge that safety was just within reach. As they neared the exit, a deafening roar erupted from above. The building shuddered violently, and for a terrifying moment, it seemed as if the entire structure was about to come down on top of them. The ground shook, sending debris crashing down around them. The force of the tremor knocked several people to the ground, and for a brief, heart-stopping moment, panic threatened to overtake them all. But Michael didn't falter. He pushed himself up, his limbs trembling with exhaustion, and reached out to help those who had fallen. "We're almost there," he urged, his voice filled with a desperate urgency. "Just a little further. Keep going." With a final burst of energy, the group surged forward, stumbling over the rubble and through the smoke-filled air. The sunlight streaming through the broken glass of the entrance was blinding, but it was a sight they welcomed with open arms. It was the light of freedom, of survival, of a world that still existed beyond the horrors they had just escaped. One by one, they made it out into the open air, gasping for breath as they collapsed onto the pavement outside. The contrast between the chaos inside and the relative calm of the outside world was jarring. The sky above was still a brilliant blue, the sun shining down as if nothing had happened, while behind them, the North Tower loomed ominously, a towering reminder of the nightmare they had just endured. Michael stood among the survivors, his chest heaving as he took in the scene around him. The sound of sirens blared in the distance, emergency vehicles rushing to the scene, and the voices of those who had made it out alive filled the air with a mixture of sobs and relieved laughter. But even as he allowed himself a moment of relief, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over yet. He turned back to look at the tower, the building that had been his workplace, his routine, his life. It was now a symbol of destruction, of the fragility of life, of the horrors that human beings could inflict on one another. And yet, in that moment, Michael felt a deep sense of gratitude for the lives that had been spared, for the strength that had carried them through, and for the faith that had never wavered. But there was no time to dwell on it. The building groaned once more, a sound that echoed through the streets like a death knell. The ground shook, and Michael knew what was coming. "Get back!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the noise as he grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her further away from the building. They ran, their legs aching with the effort, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. The sound of collapsing steel and concrete filled the air, a thunderous roar that seemed to drown out everything else. But Michael didn't look back. He kept his eyes forward, focused on getting as far away as possible. Finally, they stopped, their lungs burning, their bodies trembling with exhaustion. They turned just in time to see the North Tower collapse in on itself, a massive cloud of dust and debris rising up into the sky. It was a sight that would be seared into their memories forever, a symbol of the tragedy they had survived and of the lives that had been lost. But as the dust began to settle, Michael felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Sarah, her face streaked with dirt and tears, but her eyes filled with a profound sense of relief. "We made it," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "We made it out." Michael nodded, his own eyes filling with tears as he pulled her into a tight embrace. They had made it out, but they knew their lives would never be the same. The world had changed in those few short hours, and they had changed with it. As they stood there, surrounded by the chaos of the aftermath, Michael offered one final prayer, a prayer of thanks, of hope, and of faith that would carry them through whatever came next. They had survived the worst, and now they would find a way to rebuild, to heal, and to move forward with the knowledge that they were never truly alone. Part 5. Reflections on Faith. Years had passed since that fateful day, but the memories remained vivid, etched into the minds of those who had lived through it. Michael Bennett found himself standing at the 9/11 Memorial in New York City, his gaze fixed on the reflecting pools that marked where the Twin Towers once stood. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm, golden light over the memorial, the water shimmering as it cascaded down the sides of the pools. Beside him stood Sarah, now a close friend, someone with whom he shared an unbreakable bond forged in the fires of that terrible day. The city had rebuilt itself, stronger and more resilient, but the scars remained, both on the skyline and in the hearts of those who had witnessed the tragedy firsthand. Michael's hand rested on the engraved names of the victims, his fingers tracing the letters as he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. The events of September 11th had changed him in ways he couldn't have imagined. His faith had been tested, his courage pushed to the limits, but through it all, he had found a deeper understanding of what it meant to trust in God. As he stood there, the sounds of the city fading into the background, Michael felt a sense of peace wash over him. It was a peace that had been hard-won, born from the belief that even in the darkest of times, God's presence was a guiding light. He knew that he had been spared for a reason, that his life had been touched by a miracle, and that he had been given a second chance to live with purpose and faith. "I think about that day every time I come here," Sarah said softly, breaking the silence. Her voice was steady, but there was an underlying emotion that spoke of the weight of their shared experience. "I think about how close we came to not making it out, and how different things could have been." Michael nodded, his gaze still fixed on the names. "I think about it too," he replied. "But more than that, I think about how we were never alone. I think about the strength that carried us through, and the faith that kept us going when everything seemed lost." Sarah looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You saved my life that day, Michael. I don't think I ever told you just how much your faith meant to me. It gave me the strength to keep going when I thought I couldn't." Michael turned to her, a gentle smile on his lips. "It wasn't just me, Sarah. It was God working through all of us. We were brought together for a reason, and I believe that reason was to remind us that faith is more powerful than fear." They stood in silence for a few moments longer, the weight of the past mingling with the hope of the future. The city around them had changed, just as they had, but the lessons of that day had remained. Michael knew that his life had been forever altered, but he also knew that he had been given a gift of faith, of survival, and of a deeper understanding of what it meant to live with purpose. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the memorial, Michael offered a final prayer, one of gratitude and remembrance. He prayed for those who had been lost, for those who had survived, and for the strength to continue living with faith and hope. The world had been shaken to its core on that day, but from the rubble, a new resolve had emerged, a resolve to never forget and to always trust in the power of faith. With a deep breath, Michael and Sarah turned away from the memorial, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. They knew that life would continue to throw obstacles in their path, but they also knew that they would face them with the same strength and faith that had carried them through that day. And as they walked away, hand in hand, they knew that they would never be alone on this journey, for God's presence would always be with them, guiding them through every step. If this story moved you, please leave a comment below to share your thoughts and experiences. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, God bless you.